Let's kick off the week talking all-star game festivities, the quick exit for Patty Mills, the buyout market speculation around Dragic, and what to expect for Kevin Durant and Ben Simmons down the stretch of the season, all coming up right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. So welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every single day. I am Adam Armbrecht, of course, not only covering the Brooklyn Nets, but also the New York Football Giants over on the One Giant podcast with my boy, Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day and remind you that today's episode is brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online has you covered all season long with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Bet Online, where the game starts. We're going to get into, obviously, a little bit of All-Star Weekend action, then some news around one Kevin Durant, thoughts on Ben Simmons as we come out of this break here, and ultimately a potential buyout market guy that we talked about before in Goran Dragic, Steve Nash involved, trying to pitch the veteran guard to joining the Brooklyn Nets here. And we'll just talk a little bit around what those possibilities are and what it would mean for the Brooklyn Nets were they able to add him. But as we say, first and foremost, right off the top, it's the Locked On Nets podcast here, and it's All-Star Weekend. And frankly, there's some highs and lows to this. We knew that Patty Mills was going to be competing in the three-point competition. You have, obviously, the Rising Stars. Then you get the skills competition mixed in there as well. They kind of threw a little bit of a twist on that. You had the Cleveland team, the rookie team, and then you had Giannis and his brothers out there to varying degrees of effectiveness, I guess you could say. I obviously want to get to to what feels like the ire of Twitter and most NBA fans, the dunk competition. But as I said, Patty Mills gets in on the three-point competition. He gives himself 21 points. So there's no shame in the appearance. He also does get knocked out fairly quickly, and there's also no shame in that. And I actually think it's for the best because it's really good for Patty Mills to get acknowledged at All-Star Weekend. He's had an incredibly strong first quote-unquote half or first two-thirds of the season for the Brooklyn Nets. He's a 33-year-old veteran, and he's knocking it down at a great clip from beyond the arc. That being said, we talk so much when we think about it from a Nets perspective around not wanting this guy to get grinded down, him needing the extra rest. And while it may seem incidental, you're still traveling over the All-Star weekend, right? You're going there, you're hoisting up a number of three-point attempts, and then you're going to travel back and obviously get back into your rhythm here after the break. I just want Patty Mills to be rested. So while I would have been ecstatic if he was able to get himself through the first couple rounds, maybe find himself in the finals, it is what it is. And I'm not going to really be too concerned about what we didn't get to witness from a Brooklyn Net perspective. Incidentally, though, a New Jersey native, my home state, in the Big Cat, Karl Anthony Towns took down the three-point competition. And frankly, he had told people about that. Great odds for him if you were throwing down a few bucks on the festivities, and he cleaned up. So as you would suspect, it would be a center that wins the three-point shooting competition. Skills competition was fun. It's cool to see these different group of guys. I think we just, for whatever reason, talked about Josh Giddey, or a lot of people were saying it over on YouTube around can the Nets make a trade for a young Josh Giddey in the offseason and really bring together this Australian just super squad in Brooklyn underneath Sean Marks? And now you got Simmons. Kyrie Irving is an Australian born player, technically speaking. And then you also, of course, have Patty Mills there as well. So a lot of fun connections there. But that was enjoyable. The three-point shooting competition is always enjoyable. The Rising Stars is fun to get a look at some young guys. Right now, as I'm recording this, it is Sunday night, and the All-Star game is probably just getting underway, maybe just working through the introductions and seeing what's going on there. But frankly, we know it'll be exciting. There'll be some flashy plays, and we get down the stretch. There'll be some real football. Maybe why not? We all miss the NFL, don't we? Real basketball getting played down the stretch, but we'll leave that for tomorrow and come in and recap any really exciting moments that we saw there. The dunk competition did not offer any exciting moments, and again, it's this little footnote because it's just the All-Star break and who really cares. But Doug and I had just talked over the last couple episodes about how the NBA owns that trade deadline week, really, which coincided with the lead up to the championship game in the NFL. So you're talking about a league that seems to have such a great pulse on how to market itself. It's obviously the top sport in terms of having your best athletes and your brightest stars be at the forefront. Everyone can recognize the big names from this sport. And yet, they cap off Saturday night's festivities with listen, was have other years been more exciting? Sure. But when you go through these clunky motions, and I'm not going to call anybody out individually, Obi Toppin took it down on a little bit of a bank dunk off the backboard there for the New York Knicks. Congratulations to him. But when you have guys trying to figure things out on the fly or attempting some unique passes and having someone assist them with it, after 3 or 4, run-ups towards the basket, the crowd is kinda sitting there. They're wondering what's going on. You have all these NBA legends that you bring out there to judge it. They're waiting for things to happen. Shaquille O'Neal's falling asleep on the sidelines. Like, there has to be a different mechanism to to what you do when it comes to getting the highest impact and excitement level around this. And I don't know if any of these, because a lot of these were young players, that were involved in it. We always talk about past players that'll do it for a couple of years, and then they say, "Hey, listen, I proved myself." Aaron Gordon, obviously Dwight Howard used to do it back in the day. Vince Carter was involved in it. You even had Richardson, obviously from Golden State, who won it back-to-back years. There's these guys that want to showcase their skill and want some of those proverbial accolades. But I guess there is some inherent risk factor around doing too many crazy things. I think it was Toppin on one of his first round dunks that tried to get it and stumbled his way into the front row, the press and the camera people and everything else. I mean, what would be a bigger tragedy for any team around the league, any player, than to get hurt trying to pull off some crazy dunk? So I don't know what the answer is, but fans were not too impressed. Most most commentary around it was along the lines of, "What are we doing here, guys? You ramp this thing up. It's the build up, the build up, the build up, and then, as Peter Griffin would say, a bit of a fizzle." So it'd be interesting to see if they can kind of pivot directions here and maybe open things up into some version of all the all-stars being a part of this, not just guys that are involved specifically for the three-point shooting in that aspect or a skills competition. Like they modified the skills competition, right? They turned it into this different three-team process, points being given out round by round, and then what happens at the end, who comes out on top. So maybe you just need to get rid of the dunk competition altogether and bring in some of the all-stars that are going to be in the game and maybe just have some different launch shots, some more additional skills and passing drills. I don't know. But they got to find something better than that, because it was a real bummer. and we'll see how, obviously, the All-Star game again is mostly a lot of dunking, a lot of open court, a lot of lack of defense, and that's cool. But there always ends up being a couple of guys that really want to get the MVP trophy. This year's All-Star MVP trophy is going to be, I didn't get a look at it yet, but it's going to be in the vein of Kobe Bryant, an homage to the late Kobe Bryant, the great Kobe Bryant. So maybe some players like a LeBron James are going to be intent on getting it. Maybe a guy like Steph Curry, who's been on this, revenge tour, so to speak, this season, is going to want to make that statement. Or, Luka. There's a lot of guys that obviously may put their foot down and say, I want to make a statement in this game. And that'll be interesting to see. And like I say, Doug and I'll tie a bow on that and get some of his perspective, even on Kobe, as we know, one of his favorite players growing up. And we'll touch in on that for the Tuesday episode. That being said, though, beyond the fun, beyond the break, which was really important for the Brooklyn Nets, we know they won 2 out of 3 going into the break, couldn't get that last one against the Wizards. But what about Kevin Durant and his timeline? What about Ben Simmons? And then also the Dragic piece, and whether or not the Brooklyn Nets can be real players in this buyout market opportunity where you're trying to both bolster what you have on your roster and also keep him off of other potential competitors. We know some teams in the East that are vying for his services as well. We'll get into all of that right after, though. We tell you about our friends over at Built Bar, because as you know, it's that time of year, and we've said you make those New Year's resolutions, you try like heck to stick with them. Lord knows I do. And then sometimes they fade, sometimes they fizzle. And that's okay, though, because this year, if you make Built Bar a part of your resolution, especially when it comes to eating healthier, trying to get in shape, I know I'm trying to do that, you're going to give yourself an opportunity to have a healthy protein bar that tastes great and doesn't fill you up with all that garbage stat lines, as we like to say. that a candy bar could. Covered in 100% real chocolate. You know that they have, as we've told you before, the Puffs, which are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow bar. They're fluffy. They're marshmallow-y, so to speak. And they're not just a protein bar. They're also a treat. And like I say, 100% real chocolate covering up on these bad boys. And when you compare it, by the way, to other stat lines here, first let's hit you with what Built Bar tells you about. Most of these bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, just 4 grams of net carbs, and 17 grams of protein compared to those typical candy bars, which can be around 240 calories. Good Lord. It hurts. I get a cavity just saying what I could be putting into my body. And then 30 grams of sugar. That's where those cavities come from, by the way. You got mint brownie over there on built.com, coconut almond, and then even new for this month, white chocolate cookies and cream. They're all delicious, and new flavors come out all the time. So check back to the website often to make sure that you get in on some of those delicious new flavors. They're all going to be tasty. They're all going to be delicious, and they're all going to be good for you. So as we come out of this break then, and we think about what the Brooklyn Nets are going to look to accomplish here, going to get to the schedule on the back end of this episode as well, just to set the table. A bit of a melancholy note here for the Brooklyn Nets and for Kevin Durant. It came out late, I think Saturday night or early Sunday, that his grandmother passed away early on. So I think it was early on Sunday morning. His mother, I believe, announced it on social media, saying that his grandmother had passed away early in the morning. So we're not, we obviously would send condolences to Kevin Durant and to his family. We don't have direct contact with him, but we hope that obviously he gets to spend some time. He left the All-Star weekend. He left the festivities. He was only symbolically the captain of his team, but he's not going to be a part of any of it at all. And rightfully so. No one's going to question that. And then hopefully he gets to take some time in the coming days, which will obviously be around spending time with his family and taking care of anything that may have to go on as far as a service and just being able to say goodbye to a loved one. I don't know. We didn't have any indication beyond that around what the timeline looks like for him to come back for the Brooklyn Nets. But at the very least, I would assume you can probably take this week off the table automatically because now, again, between making arrangements and just taking the requisite time to be able to be with your loved ones, there's not going to be any pressure from anybody on the Brooklyn Nets, nor should there be. There shouldn't be any pressure from the fans. No one should be speculating around anything. Let him do what he needs to do. And when he comes back to the team, you'll take it from there. So I would automatically wipe him off the board here as far as an early return to the team. And we'll get into the schedule and where we think he could show up. Doug and I had been previously saying maybe sometime at the beginning of March, but we kind of put mid-March as the safe, comfortable date for him to return. And that would have been saying the Brooklyn Nets in their model, not pressuring players to come back too soon from injury, obviously being precautious and giving themselves every opportunity to have a 100% healthy Kevin Durant for the push down the stretch. The other player then is, of course, Ben Simmons, and there's no update on that piece of it either. There was going back to last year when we talk about the mental health aspect that he has spoken to since last season after the playoffs. There's a personal side to what went on for him involving family members, and certainly if you want to go and search out that information, you can read up on it. You can take away whatever you want from it. At the very least, understand that referencing personal situations that were difficult to work his way through, and that's what he um, indicated in his introductory press conference when he joined the Brooklyn Nets. It sounds like there were some real things going on there, and that could certainly make it difficult, at least in the off season, and then pile on some difficulties already with the head coach or with Embiid and everything else. You could see why it would lead to a hard stretch for Ben Simmons. Now, it's not putting that in context to say, and that's why he can step back on the court tomorrow for the Brooklyn Nets. I still think that they're going to take their time bringing him along, and it's just going to be a matter of when does he physically feel up to speed? When does he feel comfortable with what's going to be asked of him within the system that Steve Nash wants to run? And then, yes, does he feel comfortable? I think sometimes, mental health can be this umbrella term, and rightfully so, where it can be referring to a lot of different things. Someone can be dealing with depression. They can be dealing with a fatigue of a different kind. They can just be dealing with personal issues that make it difficult to focus on your day-to-day profession, day-to-day tasks. Again, we're not really one to speculate on this type of stuff. Suffice it to say, just like Kevin Durant now, there's no concrete timeline being put out by the Brooklyn Nets. Ben Simmons did say March 10th when asked, 76ers, yeah, he'd like to be out there for that game. So hopefully he's able to get himself to that place. It was also, just on a quick footnote, confirmed by Morey, Daryl Morey, GM for the Philadelphia 76ers, without going into the details, he said, yes, that Ben Simmons was dealing with things away from the court, and they understood that. So there were two different things going on when you talk about how things fell apart there for Simmons and the 76ers from a relationship standpoint. There was the basketball piece of it, and whether or not that was going to fit and work going forward. There was the personal side of it, and then ultimately a divide between the two. And Daryl Morey even did say that he had additional trade opportunities, but once the Brooklyn James Harden scenario started to come into focus, that became where they shifted their attention. And we knew all that speculation around the Kings and what was maybe going to happen there fell through as well. So all this to say, everybody seems to be moving on from their former teams and former situations. No one seems to be spitting too much venom on one side over the other, and we'll see how it plays out on either side of it. The last piece then that we heard about here, and people have been asking on the last a couple of our videos, especially around the trade deadline. We did the live stream when the Nets ultimately pulled off the trade for Ben Simmons, the buyout market, right? And so many people, we get it. We're saying that Nets need to get another 3-and-D guy, right? Need a 3-and-D wing, 3-and-D wing. The Nets and every other team. These are the sought after commodities around the NBA, and they're not easy to find. And right now in the buyout market, they really don't exist. So the question then became for the Brooklyn Nets and a lot of these teams is, who are the best available players on the buyout market? And how do you see them fitting in with you? Do they elevate what you're capable of accomplishing? And can you make that decision and make that move to prevent them from going somewhere else? I mentioned at the top, Goran Dragic, just to give you the most recent news, the update was that the Brooklyn Nets pitched him on coming and joining them in Brooklyn, helping to continue to bolster their roster when they look to make this playoff push here down the stretch of the season and ultimately a deep run in the playoffs. Was chief among those with the pitch, Steve Nash. They had overlap going back to their time on the Phoenix Suns as players. I think it was from '08 to 2011. Let's see if I get this right here. Yes, it was 2008. First several seasons, two players played from 2008 until Dragic was traded to the Rockets in 2011, and they've held a close relationship. We've said this before around when you're looking to bring in new players. Obviously, that's a component of what we think Steve Nash brings to the Brooklyn Nets. He's still very close to his playing career. There's a number of players in the league today that played with him, played alongside him, played around him, or at least are very aware of him. So when Steve Nash is talking to Dragic about how he can fit and what the opportunity looks like, I think he can speak to him on a basketball level, on a current player level, where Dragic is going to respect the perspective that he's giving to him. That being the case, the other players inside of this, the Lakers have been mentioned, the Clippers have been mentioned, the Milwaukee Bucks have been mentioned, and we already know that because of the process of the trade deadline, where the Nets maybe had an offer for Nicholas Claxton and weren't able to move off of him, they had to pivot and went ahead and cut DeAndre Bembry. He ends up getting picked up by a competitor, and now all of a sudden another name is being attached to them, where we're saying, are we staring down one of our chief rivals when it comes to getting through the Eastern Conference and going to a potential NBA Finals, and seeing them potentially add pieces that we would love to be having on our roster? I want to walk through what it would look like for Dragic to be a part of this team. And then also, unlike the last buyout market, this is a different version. Nets are in a different place than they were a year ago. So the viability of Brooklyn to a prospective buyout market player like Dragic may look a lot different than it did a year ago when we're talking about the Blake Griffins and the LaMarcus Aldridges of the world. But before we do that, got to, of course, tell you about our good friends over at Bet Online. Said it at the top here. Football, as we know, it's over. It's all over. The long off season is ahead. But basketball is in full steam heading towards those playoffs. From all the latest odds, totals, player performances, props, and where to get the next fire coach is going to land. Good Lord. Doug said it the other day. Why do we got to talk about who's getting fired? Let's just come on. Let's all hope for good things for everyone around the league. But BetOnline is the number one spot for all those sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news all season long. And it's not just basketball. Again, football's over. But BetOnline is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC odds, right down to the Olympic coverage, which just wrapped. So you could have got all that great information over there to see who was going to be taking down the medal counts, how many was USA going to get. You could have been in on that action as well. Head over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. And of course, as we tell you always, you make us your first listen. You can make Locked On Now your second listen. It's going to be all those local experts around the league, nightly coverage of the NBA action. Subscribe today wherever you get those needs fulfilled, over on YouTube as well, so you can get all the insights just like you get from us around these little teams. Check out those playoff matchups. Who are we potentially going to be looking at in the play-in game, in the first round series? Let's make sure that we give ourselves a right foot, get some of those little edges. Maybe Steve Nash listens into them. I don't know for sure. At the end of the day, though, the other piece that we say around Goran Dragic and what it would mean were he to come to Brooklyn first and foremost. So we know what Dragic is. He's obviously an established NBA veteran. We also know that he's capable of running the point. And when you look at the Brooklyn Nets right now, you still haven't folded in Ben Simmons to this process yet. You have obviously Kyrie Irving, but then it's Patty Mills, it's Seth Curry, Cam Thomas, right? Bruce Brown, Javon Carter. Like Javon Carter might be the second pure point guard on this team. And there's no reason why you're looking at him saying, hey, why don't you get down and run the point? Quite frankly, he would be a cut candidate should the Nets be able to acquire Dragic. So bringing him in would automatically solve one problem. And that could probably be a part of what Steve Nash is selling him on. You come in here, you're going to have a prominent role helping to run this offense. If we think about with and without James Harden, we speculated on this before, will Kyrie Irving once again, and we know right now only being able to play the road games, he's going to acquiesce to other players on the roster to run the point and play off ball. We know that once he gets it in his hands, he can create off the dribble, he can take on defenders, go to the basket, facilitate, etc. So he doesn't need to, like maybe Harden, be an active member, an active role on a possession-to-possession basis. He can pick and choose his spots. So Dragic can fill in immediately into that spot. We talk about Patty Mills and the fatigue factor for him in the first half of the year. Even though Dragic is older and he's a veteran, you go back his last few seasons with the Miami Heat, he was playing in the 26 to 28 minute range. So again, this isn't a guy you're going to run out there for 35 plus minutes a night, but all of a sudden you can take a little bit of lift off of Patty Mills' shoulders, and then you can play him alongside with Patty, alongside with Seth, alongside with Kyrie, with any number, Ben Simmons, once we figure out what his role is going to be as well. So he obviously brings a particular skill set that works well for what the Nets need. He also brings the shooting. The field goal percentage overall has dropped over the last couple of years. He used to shoot very high, get to the rim a little bit more, attacking at the basket. Doesn't come as easily as it used to for him, but the outside shot is still there. 37% last year, 37% the year prior. He's been a career 36% shooter. You can expect, like a lot of players that come to the Brooklyn Nets, those numbers can get a little bump by playing around Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and the like. So, yes, there is a function here. But the other piece of it is this the most viable landing spot for him? Because if it's about, I want to be an integral part to winning a championship for a team, well, then the Nets could be chief among them because they can probably offer him the most substantial role walking in the door. A team like the Bucks might be looking to bolster what they have. The Lakers are also vying for him. But when you look at the Lakers, I mean, right now, the Lakers and the Nets, look at where they are in the standings. Does Dragic approach it as well? If you add me to your team, that's going to get us those extra handful of wins in the short and long term that are going to push us up into a playoff spot, get us out of the play-in games, etc., and then make us a dangerous team in the playoffs. I'm sure that's how Dragic looks at it. But like I was saying before, last year, it was about hopping on the rising star that was the Brooklyn Nets. Things fall apart in the playoffs for them. Injuries happen, and they ultimately lose to the Milwaukee Bucks. This year, it feels different, though. They were on an 11-game losing streak. They make a massive in-season trade with a conference rival. They bring in a player who hasn't been on the court this year. They're dealing with a minor, albeit still, injury for Kevin Durant. They only have a part-time playing Kyrie Irving. It doesn't have the same necessarily the same energy that it did last season. Now, it doesn't mean, because a lot of people around the NBA have said, when you take a step back, Seth Curry and adding Drummond and getting Ben Simmons integrated here, this team is still very dangerous. But as we know, the Brooklyn Nets are staring down what I'm going to call interesting final stretch of the season here. And I'll pull up the remaining schedule as we talk about it and speculate how important it could be to get Dragic, or if they can feel comfortable moving through here. By the way, adding Dragic would be adding now what? The fourth, fifth? I mean, if Carter, you assume, would be gone, but 5 or 6 guards here. And it actually speaks to what I think is the philosophy now with this team. Once you get Simmons integrated and Kevin Durant comes back, now you're looking at this and you're saying this is about having athletic, strong defensive-minded players. Obviously, Ben Simmons first and foremost. Kevin Durant can handle his business on the defensive end of the floor, and then shooters all around. And it's the same model in the sense of, we're going to outscore you and you're going to have to come chase us, as they have when they first brought together the big three. It's just going to be done in a different way, where it's going to be waves of guys that can do it to you, as opposed to, well, with Harden, Kyrie, and KD, and then having a player like Joe Harris out on the wing. Boy, just the spacing, it naturally creates all these opportunities. Now it's going to say, well, Simmons, not a shooter, Kevin Durant, Kyrie, but now we're going to hit you with Seth Curry. We're going to hit you with Patty Mills. We're going to hit you with Joe Harris if he can get healthy. We're going to hit you with a Dragic if he gets back out there on the floor. And you're going to try to just pummel people with waves after waves of guys that fairly consistently have shown they can knock down those perimeter looks. That being the case, looking over at the schedule here as they come out of the break, you see, obviously they went through the Knicks, lost to the Wizards there. When they first come out, so the first and foremost would be the upcoming week here. You're going to get Thursday as the first game. I don't anticipate any Ben Simmons, any Kevin Durant, for the reasons we talked about this week. So you're going to have to go through a home game without Kyrie Irving against the Boston Celtics, who we know have been playing very well of late. And then you're going to have to go on the road to the Milwaukee Bucks. Could they win one of those games? Yes, but I'm not going to say that it's likely. The following week, if we're talking about when we want to get Ben Simmons back on the floor, you see that date down there. Thursday, the 10th, Philadelphia 76ers on the road, which means Kyrie Irving can play in that game as well. Great opportunity to get Kyrie Irving, maybe Kevin Durant and Ben Simmons out there together, but at least if you're targeting Ben Simmons for that date, you want to look at the game prior, Tuesday the 8th, against the Charlotte Hornets. But in between now and then, it's Boston, Milwaukee, home and away against the Toronto Raptors, Miami, going to be a difficult matchup, we know, Boston again, and then Charlotte before you get into the 76ers, followed by the Knicks, and then the soft target date that I've put in my mind of Kevin Durant's return being Tuesday, the 15th, against the Orlando Magic. Now, with or without Dragic, over this run here, I'm not going to look at Boston or Milwaukee and say that you're going to win those games. Toronto, who's been playing better of late as well, you got to try to grab one or two of those, one or both of those, and then you go right back into Miami and Boston. 100% healthy, these are dangerous games and difficult games to play. If you added in Dragic from the buyout market, he's not going to be available immediately. He's not going to walk out there game number one, and you're not going to put it on his back. The same way that when Seth Curry walked out there, you got a couple wins, but then you still dropped one before the break, and with Andre Drummond as well. These next 6 games, you could be 1-5. You could be 1-5 over those next 6 games before you start to look and get into the place where we think, yes, we have a real opportunity to get Ben Simmons out there and to get Kevin Durant out there as well. And once you hit that 315 mark, and this is just purely speculative, once you hit that mark, then you start to get into it where Orlando's a winnable game. Even Dallas is a winnable game. Portland winnable. Utah winnable. But again, we're assuming health here. Memphis, Miami, some difficult ones, but you do get Charlotte, you do get Detroit, you do get Atlanta, who's a rising team that you can keep pushed down behind you. And as we said, the last 4 games of this season, 3 out of 4 of them being the Houston Rockets, the New York Knicks, and the Indiana Pacers, those are important because those could be the ones that push you over the hump here. It all comes down to when Kevin Durant gets back out there healthy, assuming that Ben Simmons has already come along as Kevin Durant's preparing to return to the court. But there's still going to be a very difficult road ahead here between coming out of this All-Star break and getting to the place where you're 100% healthy. And that's where a player like Goran Dragic can make a difference for you. If you can bring him in, all of a sudden it softens the blow of the home games when you can't have Kyrie Irving, at least as it stands right now. It's just one more guard that you can get out there on the court that can run your offense effectively for you and gives you another perimeter shooter to utilize when you're working with LaMarcus Aldridge right now and Andre Drummond, who, by the way, did say he's tired. He was not getting run these kind of minutes, but it's very clear that the Brooklyn Nets have a larger role for him here in Brooklyn than he had in Philadelphia backing up Joel Embiid, and that's a conditioning piece that's going to take place over the next 7 to 10 days and over the next, 5, 6, 7 games, right? So all of these things need to fall into place, and I'm sure we'll talk about it on the next episode. Over on 538, 63% is where the Brooklyn Nets now stand to make the playoffs at this point. And all those weeks ago when Doug said, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's certainly further from zero than it was at the start of the season and than it was at all these key checkpoints. Now that can drastically change once everyone's back on the court and healthy. Hopefully this little reprieve with the All-Star break does rejuvenate some of the veterans who've already been putting in big minutes. We mentioned Patty Mills. I'll mention Blake Griffin as well in there. So these are real opportunities for these guys to figure out, get refreshed, figure out how they integrate with one another. Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, continue to figure that out, continue to get some rest, and hopefully come out here with what is going to be a critical run leading up to the playoffs. And as Patty Mills did say, we'll get out of here on this. I think being able to add the pieces we've added, getting people back from injury, this is who we got. I keep talking about the vibe around the locker room and everyone enjoying each other's presence. You can feel it in the locker room, and that's going to carry us a long way. I believe we can stay tight as a group. It's going to take all of us to get the job done. It's a massive push for us coming up. This is going to be every single game critical mass, because every time someone behind in the standings wins a game, puts pressure on you. And every time that a team above you grabs a win, it just continues to push you further and further. So playing games obviously are going to be very much on the table for the Brooklyn Nets here. That's okay. Again, not unlike years past. All this is about is give me 100% health walking into the playoffs, and I'll live with whatever the process is to give ourselves a chance to win a title. Doug and I, as I skipped over, that was the obviously schedule outlook after the break. Doug and I will be back in tomorrow. We'll take one last look back at the All-Star game, talk about who took home the newly coined Kobe Bryant MVP of the All-Star game trophy, and then look ahead to these key matchups starting on Thursday with the Boston Celtics. You can obviously head over to YouTube if you're watching us there. Doug usually says it. I'm going to say it. The numbers have been just fantastic. The subscriptions, people starting to follow us over there more and more and more. Everyone's in on the chats. You're now starting conversations with one another around different aspects of the team, which is absolutely awesome because we try to, and it's getting harder and harder to keep up with what everyone is commenting in there as they start to pile up. But it's great. We want to form this Locked On Nets community that everyone can get in and start to chop up around the team. So continue to support us. We really cannot tell you how much we appreciate it. And obviously, get that podcast feed wherever you have those needs fulfilled. Listen, no quote tonight. Coming out of the All-Star break, rest up, friends. That's the quote from yours truly. And let's hit this thing ground running as we come out of the break. We'll be back again next time talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.